In line with what the last speaker had to say about the conditions and pay of the Defence Forces and the conditions under which they lived and the housing that they had over the years, and then not being given housing, many of them living in the backs of their cars in order to operate as soldiers or as naval officers or naval personnel, I do marvel at the government's attempt to spend more money on defence but not on the Defence Forces themselves. So the idea that we would join PESCO and increase the proportion of our budget that goes towards military hardware rather than the lives and the terms and conditions of the ordinary decent men and women and others who work for our Defence Forces is quite obscene. And I notice that the Irish Times carries an article today that you are going to legislate as soon as possible to get rid of the triple lock. I want to ask you, Taoiseach, would it not serve you better to use whatever resources that would be put in to investigate whether or not the women of honour are entitled to give evidence to this tribunal? Would those resources not be better spent on giving the people of the country a chance to vote on a referendum as to whether or not they want to ditch their neutrality in the way you seem to do with haste? I've been asked by the Women of Honour to raise a couple of questions, and some of them I probably have already been asked. I was out at a protest for Palestine there, so I missed all the discussion. But those involved in setting the terms of reference may have inadvertently excluded many members of the Defence Forces, including the Women of Honour, for the very understandable reasons that many of these members did not engage of the process of the complaints process that existed. Can you please clarify reference number 4? I just want to hear you say it again. I think they want to hear you say it again. Reference number 4, to investigate whether complaints of abuse were actively deterred or whether there was a culture that discouraged the making of a complaint of abuse. Will that reference allow everyone to be included in the tribunal, including those that did not engage? And your answer is yes, and that is most welcome. The other question I want to ask you is on page 91 of the executive summary. Reference to the Department of Defence commissioned an independent review group, and the last recommendation of that states that the Minister, that is you, Minister Martin, should consider a complete review and a replacement of the redress of wrongs procedure under section 114 of the Defence Act 1954 and Administrative Instruction A7 Chapter 2 in light of modern HR practice. And you may have answered that as well. If not, could you address that? And lastly, just to ask you, do you think it's best practice that if you yourself were involved in drawing up the terms of reference, that's best practice if you're going to be somebody who's going to be subjected to participation in the tribunal as a witness to that tribunal?